Hi, Chuck Hawley from West Marine. This is our buyer's guide for selecting anti-fouling paint, also known as bottom paint, for your boat. And you know, frankly, it's a fairly complicated decision. It seems like a while ago all you had to do was choose color, but now there are a variety of chemistries and biocides that you can choose from, so the questions are a little bit more complicated. But in this brief video, we'd like to show you how to select the right paint for your boat. Now, first I had to point out that there is a lot of good information both on the web and in resources like the West Marine Annual Catalog, where we've got advisors on it. And also you'll find that manufacturers produce boaters painting guides that are very, very valuable too. So if you're running out of patience or you don't quite know what to buy, going to your local West Marine store or researching online or looking at some of these publications can really help. One question you have to get straight right off the bat is, if you're painting a boat that has an aluminum stern drive or is constructed out of aluminum, you got to be careful of the biocide that you use. Because if you use paints that contain cuprous oxide, it can attack the underwater aluminum and cause a lot of expensive repairs. In general, when you're painting a boat that has an aluminum bottom or an aluminum stern drive, you want to use paints that have copper thiocyanate or possibly zinc amidine, also known as zinc parathione, as the biocide, so that it will be galvanically compatible with your underwater aluminum. It used to be that if you were selecting bottom paint for your boat, you could have any color you wanted as long as it was a dark red or a dark green or a dark blue or possibly black. And that's because the main biocide that was being used is cuprous oxide. Cuprous oxide actually works pretty well as a biocide, but because it has an inherent color, you don't get bright colors. So now we're using different biocides that actually don't have an inherent color, and so you can make the paint any color you want. So if you want a pure white or a yellow or a bright red or any variety of colors, you can choose paints that don't use cuprous oxide and that'll have some real pop. And incidentally, if you paint your bottom white, it's really easy to see the growth. So if you want to make sure that your bottom's clean before you go racing or before you go on some trip, you can just look underwater and see it very easily. Various harbors and states around the country are starting to legislate the kind of biocide that you can use on your bottom. Some of these are proposed out into the distance, but some of them are more immediate. So if you're in an area that restricts a certain type of biocide, you'll want to select an alternate biocide. A classic example is the restriction on copper in certain areas. If you're in an area that restricts the use of copper, consider using a paint that uses zinc amidine or possibly echinacea and zinc amidine as an alternative biocide. If you live in an area where you haul out your boat over the winter, but you don't want to repaint every spring, you might think about an ablative copolymer paint. The advantage of an ablative copolymer paint is that when it's exposed to the air for long periods of time, the paint doesn't lose its effectiveness. So you can haul it out in the fall, leave it out over the winter, and then just give it a wash down with soap and maybe a little light Scotch-Brite to scratch the surface, put it back in the water, and you're ready to go in the spring. Here's one other advantage of using a copolymer ablative paint. You may have a boat that's stored in the water part of the time and then is stored on a trailer or maybe in a dry stack the rest of the time. So you need good performance when it's in the water, but you don't want the paint to deteriorate when the boat is in storage. In that case, a copolymer ablative paint is a really good choice because it won't deteriorate when it's exposed to the air. You may be operating your boat in a place that has a problem with slime. Now by slime we mean a vegetative growth that grows on the bottom of the boat, and it actually is a problem for bottom paint for two reasons. One is that it may encourage harder growth to adhere and to live in that environment under your boat. And the second thing is to remove the slime. You or a diver might go down below and rub it off, and in the process you end up rubbing off perfectly good paint. In that case, you should consider a dual biocide paint. Now these are paints that have a basic biocide that takes care of hard growth, but they also have an additive that's called Biolux or Ergorol that it specifically addresses the slime issue. So if you're in an area that's slimy, consider a dual biocide paint. Now let's look at some other compatibility issues. There are three more rules you ought to be aware of. One is, if the paint on your boat is not adhering very well, don't apply more good paint over the bad paint. Strip it down so that you have a good solid base. The second thing is that some paints are considered hard paints. you don't want to put a hard paint over a soft paint because you'll get poor adhesion. And the third issue is, we used to sell a lot of paints that were vinyl based, meaning that the solvent had some vinyl chemical in it. If you put the vinyl based paints over on non-vinyl paint, they'd actually lift it almost like a paint remover, and you get poor adhesion. So the three rules are, don't put good paint over paint that's peeling or not well adhered, don't put hard paints over soft paints, and don't put vinyl paints over non-vinyl paints. Paint manufacturers formulate their paints to work well in either salt water or fresh water, or occasionally both. So obviously, if you're a Great Lakes boater, you're going to want a freshwater paint, and if you're a Floridian boater, you'll probably want a saltwater paint. So make sure you choose a paint that's formulated for the salinity of the water in which you operate. One of the questions you should ask yourself in selecting a paint is whether you use your boat frequently or infrequently. If you use your boat frequently, we recommend an ablative paint, because the very act of using the boat and having the water flow over the hull will tend to knock off the growth. If you use your boat infrequently, you may prefer a modified epoxy paint, probably with quite a high copper loading, because that's more effective for sedentary boats that don't have the water rushing past the hull. So as you can see, there are a number of questions you need answers to before you select your bottom paint. Let's briefly review what those questions are. First, are you painting over an aluminum hull or an outdrive? Next, do you want to end up with bright, brilliant colors or more muted colors? Are you in an area which restricts the biocides, specifically copper? Are you in an area where slime is a problem? Do you want to haul out over the winter and then relaunch without repainting? Are you going to be using a vinyl-based paint? Are you in fresh water or salt water? How frequently do you use your boat? And do you store your boat out of the water when you're not using it? So the answer to these questions can help you select the right bottom paint for your boat. We hope this has been a helpful video. We look forward to serving you at any of our 300 stores across the country or online at westmarine.com.